Hi, I'm Tom Armbruster. Glad to talk with you a little bit about Cuba. I was in Havana from 1991 to 1993 in the U.S. interest section. And often people would say, well, I didn't think we had relations with Cuba. Well, we didn't. Officially, it was under the Swiss mission. But we were able to do visas, do consular work, visit Americans in prison. And so we did have that back and forth diplomatic avenue, and we had quite a few American Foreign Service officers working there. At that time, they just lost their Soviet subsidies, and so for the Cubans, it was a very difficult time economically. I don't think over the years it's gotten much easier. I think for the Cuban people under Fidel, it's been a very tough time economically. Of course, you had the first wave of Cubans coming to the United States right after the revolution, people who lost their homes, people who lost loved ones, and then you had the Marielitos in the 1980s who were really economic migrants. Now we've got a chance, hopefully, to bring the Cuban American community into the Cuban community back home and be a positive influence. I think some years earlier that would have been more difficult as feelings were more raw, people were looking for compensation for the property that they lost, and perhaps it would have been impossible actually for the Cuban Americans to play a positive role. I think that may be different now. Fidel, El Jefe, was a huge figure for Cuba. I saw him twice during the time I was there. Once in the Pan American Games when the crowd spontaneously did the wave and stood up, and Fidel, as the wave came around to him, also stood up and did the wave. His entourage did not, but you better believe the second time the wave came around, everybody stood up. That was something to see. The second time I saw him at Marina Hemingway, and he was there to greet the explorer Thor Heyerdahl. Very active, very vigorous, and you could tell he had quite a spell on the crowd there. But El Jefe is gone. Raul does not have that charisma, and so I think there are possibilities, but it's going to be very slow. American businesses interested in investing in Cuba are going to have to do it step by step and realize that the Cubans themselves may not be ready for that kind of thing. When I was on the visa line in Cuba, we all had nicknames, and mine was El Planchador. People would come in with very high hopes, and I just kind of ironed them flat. Another one, one of my colleagues was called Senior No-No, and he's now U.S. Chief of Mission in Havana, Jeff De Laurentiis. You get to know the Cubans pretty well, and they would try to play us on the visa line a little bit too. I had one young man come and say, look, if you don't give me a visa, I'm going to get in a rubber raft, and if I die between Cuba and Florida, it's your fault. You know, it made me think a minute, but I thought, no, you don't have to get in that raft, and no, I can't give you a visa, I'm sorry. But those were the kind of games that we would play a little bit on the visa line. But it was a very serious thing, and people did risk their lives. I remember one family was taken out of Cuba, actually when someone flew in from Florida in a small plane, landed on a road, and they jumped in, took off, and flew back to Florida before they could be apprehended. So it was I called it a game, but it was definitely a serious game. I was lucky in 1991 to 1993 in that at that point the Cuban government allowed American diplomats to travel basically anywhere except Guantanamo. And so we took advantage. We traveled all over the country. Of course, we were followed, and that was a little disconcerting sometimes. But it's a beautiful country. The waterfalls, the beaches, we were able to see it and experience the Cuban people. But it was not easy to make friends. The relationship was so fraught with suspicion that our neighbors kept an eye on us, and the only real friend we had was an equestrian. He was the Olympic coach for their team, and took us horseback riding. His name was Hiram, and we had some great Sundays in Lennon Park riding horses with him, and it's a very good and fond memory. I came away convinced that American businesses and tourists should be allowed to visit Cuba, and in fact wrote what they call a dissent cable, saying that the U.S. should change position. However, just as I was working on that with some other Foreign Service officers, the humanitarian group Hermanos de Rescate was shot down by Cuban forces. And so we thought this is really not the time to pitch rapprochement between Cuba and the United States when American citizens are being shot down. So it's going to be a slow relationship. After so many years, being at odds and not having contacts, I think we can expect that it's not going to change overnight. And indeed, I hope it doesn't completely change. The Cuban character is really something. To see the De Sotos that they keep on the road and the Hudsons, they're very inventive people. The culture is tremendous, great music, and I certainly wish them the best now that Fidel is gone, and hope that without him, and certainly Raul does not have the same charisma, Cuba will be able to flourish the way it should.